I have been following Harley on his Pearl Acoustics YouTube channel for a while now. Now, I follow him because his contents are interesting and his stories are really engaging. What is very interesting about him is that he is a speaker designer, and I was so happy when he agreed to send me a pair of his Sibelius speakers for review. Now, Harley already has a YouTube channel with lots of subscribers, so he did not really need exposure from my channel. But he told me he sent it to me out of passion, and he wanted to hear my impression of his life's work. Now, the fact that Harley started designing speakers at 9 was not what caught my attention. Seriously, who designs speakers at 9? I guess that is what happens when the world has no Xbox. Anyways, it was the fact that he listens to live instrument on a regular basis. Now, this gives him a unique advantage. You see, he has done many live recordings, and he told me, unlike engineers who use measurements to voice their speakers, he uses live instruments as reference, and musicians as judges when he was building the Sibelius. Now, get some musicians into the room, play live, then play the same song on the speaker, have the musicians listen to it, and confirm it does sound like the real thing. How amazing is that? Sure, he has measurements, but Harley did not build the speakers with the goal of having textbook measurements. But he built it with the goal of sounding as real to live and amplify performance as possible. Now, all this sounds fantastic on paper. A passionate designer who is constantly around musicians and live instruments with no time pressure. Harley took 3 years to perfect the sound of his speaker. He has fine-tuned it to the point that he does not anticipate having an MK2 or MK3. As far as he is concerned, this is the final version. Period. Now, despite me having high hopes for the Sibelius before receiving it, I have one concern. Give me 2 minutes to tell you about this fruit called Durian. Durian in Asia is crowned as the king of the fruits. The problem with it is either you hate it or you love it. If you don't like it, it smells like poo. In fact, it is banned in many hotels. But if you like it, you will make special trips to go eat it. See, my family loves it, but I don't. When I went to Malaysia a few years ago, I had to plan a day just to go eat durian for them. Although I don't like durian, I keep forcing myself to eat it, hoping one day I have that aha moment and start loving it. So how does this relate to the Sibelius? The Sibelius is a single driver speaker, and I am not a big fan of single driver speakers. Just like Durian, for the past few years, I've been forcing myself to listen to single driver speakers, hoping that I will have that OMG moment. You see, I am stubborn. I know a lot of people love single driver speakers, and there must be a reason. The fact I don't enjoy them must be because I don't understand them. So whenever I come across a single driver speaker on the used market, I would buy it. Now, what bothers me about single driver speakers is that they can be a bit shouty, dry, bass is meh, and mid-range is very linear. Sure, it is more coherent, but a lot of multi-driver speakers today are pretty coherent. Yet, I was so determined to understand what is the big deal about single driver speakers that I even bought one that had an MSRP of $10,000 Canadian. I told myself, maybe the higher models will win me over. Although it never did. Eventually, I started to appreciate single driver speakers. I guess a bit like, even if you don't like spicy food, if you eat enough of it, you get used to it. So I was scratching my head as to why someone like Harley, who on paper is my kind of designer, the kind who voiced the speakers with their ear, would choose to use a single driver. Now, I still told Harley to send me because I know I can appreciate single driver speakers and I can give it a fair assessment as long as I switch my brain to single driver speaker evaluation mode. So when I first powered up the Sibelius, I was like, huh? What? Wait? Oh my gosh! This does not sound anything like the single driver speakers I've heard till now. This speaker is bloody amazing. So my audio buddies, today we are going to talk about the Sibelius speaker from Pearl Acoustics. Unlike buying from a big company, you will get a personalized experience with Pro Acoustics. Harley and his team will interact with you by email from start to end. For example, they send me photos of the progress of my speaker and a video at the end. Now, according to Pro Acoustics, the Sibelius speaker is a quarter-wave front-loaded horn with a single driver covering a full 9 octaves. Whatever that means. That sounds like Chinese to me. By the way, that was my dad joke of the day. The single driver was designed by Mark Fenlon, and it has been tweaked exclusively for Pro Acoustics. Inside, they use 2 kinds of wood and 3 different types of dampening material to voice the speaker. The cabinets are crafted from thick French oak wood instead of your typical MDF, and yeah, there's no crossover. Rated at 87 dB, the Sibelius has a frequency range of 38 Hz to 20 kHz. Now, according to what I was told, the speaker does measure quite flat down to 38 Hz. Now, despite being relatively small, the speaker weighs 23 kg each, probably because it's made of solid wood instead of MDF. So, how does the speaker sound? The top end is on the smooth side, with zero harshness, but not rolled off, yet it is extended and detailed. Because of the top end smoothness, some might find it a bit laid back, but I'm not so sure because the mid-range is full body and it's slightly forward. Bass is strong, texture, detail, fast, and not overly tight. Sure, those who want deeper bass can pair it with a subwoofer, but as it is, I think most people can live without one. Now, I can easily believe its claim of 38 Hz because when I play the Sibelius in my basement, I can feel the bass when I go to the kitchen on the first floor. Now, instrument separation is probably one of its main strengths. It is dynamic enough, especially for its size. Soundstage has depth, stretches beyond the speaker, and does have layers. Imaging reminds me of the Maggies, which I will come back later. Now, I would say this speaker is more on the warm side. In short, this is a smooth sounding speaker with spectacular instrument separation. So, let me start with what you have to be aware of if you plan to buy this speaker. First, if you are more attracted to speakers with a sharp and bright top end that sparkles like no tomorrow, you might find this speaker a little bit too smooth. For example, folk house speakers. If I had to describe folk house sound as a light show, a folk house would be flashing neon lights with fireworks in the background. So if you're chasing after that analytical, bright, detailed sound, yeah, then the Sibelius might not be for you. I guess because it lacks that folk house laser sharpness, the imaging is a bit like Maggie in the sense you can localize where everything is, but you can't take a knife and cut out people precisely. Next, when I listen to the speakers that have fast detailed bass, usually the bass is also very tight. But the Sibelius does not have what I call super tight bass. So for those of you who prefer speakers with drivers that start and stop instantaneously, just be aware of this. Okay, now let's move on to what is so great about the Sibelius. Alright guys, go get a coffee because the list is quite long. Now, my Patreons know that this is going to be a rave review because I've been sharing my progress on my Patreon page. This video is not sponsored, not paid, and Harley never told me I can keep the speakers after the video. Heck, even the famous hi-fi critic Paul Messenger had to buy these speakers with his own money after his review. Yeah, that reviewer loved these speakers so much, he ended up buying them. I myself have considered buying them because if it has good synergy with the amplifier that I am building, and if I ever do trade shows, I can use it to demo my amp. Wouldn't that be cool? Thomas displaying at a trade show? You guys can all come to my room and hang out. I will even bring instant noodles. Okay, if you don't get that joke, you need to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and watch more of my videos. So, to help me evaluate this speaker, I had Loic, Mr. Jazz, Mr. Quad, Mr. DIY, and Mr. Sona's favorite listen to it. I brought it to 3 different locations and tried it with 7 amplifiers myself. So instead of sharing one by one, my audio buddy's experience on the Sibelius, I would just combine it. Now, if you want to know everything in detail, just pay like $1 and go read it on my Patreon site. Did you see how smooth my transition to promoting my Patreon was? So, back to the Sibelius. Last week, I made a video on my friend's $300,000 system. 300,000 Canadian dollars, not pesos. And when I listen to that system, I keep telling myself, this is fantastic. It is as if I've become Superman. I can hear everything. When I listen to the Sibelius, I keep telling myself, wow, this is beautiful. Even listening to just pure acoustic music, I can feel my heart moving. When I evaluate gear these days, beyond listening to detail, soundstage, instrument separation, blah blah blah, I ask myself, how does it make me feel? And yep, this is a very musical speaker. Look, I know the Sibelius whole marketing idea is, it was voiced with the help of real instruments. In some sense, it is a waste on somebody like me to review it because I don't listen to live performance, so I don't know how real it sounds compared to the real thing. However, I do know how the clapping of a crowd sounds in real life, and I always complain, a lot of speakers don't get that right. Now, I once read a great way to describe it. Most speakers sound like raindrops instead of real people clapping. The Sibelius with the right amp sounds like real people clapping. Now, I pay attention to this a lot because I listen specifically for that in a lot of systems because it has always bothered me. So, if the Sibelius can get the sound of clapping right, and the vocal sounds pretty real, then yeah, I would not be surprised that acoustic instruments play through the Sibelius would sound close to the real thing. Now, let's talk about bass. Usually that is one of single driver speakers' biggest weakness. Now, to overcome this issue, like this $10,000, To overcome this issue, this $10,000 single driver speaker I have here solves it by a gigantic cabinet. Yes, the bass does go deep and is really strong, but it's 4 times the size of the Sibelius. The Sibelius surprisingly can compete in terms of bass when compared to this gigantic speaker. In fact, the Sibelius has more bass than my own reference speaker, the Silverline Sonata, with an 8-inch bass driver. Now, remember I said bass is not very tight with the Sibelius. It can be a negative or positive depending on you. Now, I once had supper with a cellist, and he told me, real double bass is supposed to be a bit loose, and that energy is supposed to propagate nicely across the room. Many speakers today for him are just too tight, so it doesn't sound like the real thing. The Sibelius bass is strong, and because it is not overly tight despite it being fast, I find myself enjoying certain genre of music a bit more. I love listening to jazz with this speaker, and now I understand why someone once told me, with jazz, you don't want the bass to be overly tight. It kills the mood. So the Sibelius might change your perspective on what is considered as good bass. And when I asked Harley, why am I hearing this? He explained to me, well, it has something to do with the mechanical resistance of the driver. I was like, oh, okay. I was like, phew. It's not like I was making BS up, and Harley knew exactly why I was picking up on these things. In short, the bass is one of Sibelius' strengths. I remember the first time I brought it over to Mr. Quat's home. Now, I call him Mr. Quat because he owns a pair of Quat 2905 electrostatic speakers. The first thing he did, he played a track called, I think, Zamzama from Avi Abita. Yeah, 90% sure. Now, after that song, Mr. Quat told me, just with that song, he can tell these speakers are amazing. Any less than stellar speakers will have failed in terms of separation. The first day when I listened to the Sibelius, my first reaction was, wow, they remind me of my Quad 2905. They image similarly to Maggie, where it's not laser precise to the point I can cut people out. But, just like the Quad, the separation of sound of each instrument is world class. I always say there are 2 types of detail. The first type is like the focal type. You can hear everything effortlessly. Someone drops a coin during recording, yeah, you'll hear it. The problem with that kind of detail is when there's a lot of things happening, you're constantly bombarded by information. And yes, you will hear everything easily, but you might not necessarily able to identify what you are hearing. The other kind of detail is where quad excels at. Although not as effortless, the difference is when you have multiple instruments going, you can tell easier what they are. So when I listen to quad speakers, I can zoom in easily to any one of the instruments, even if there are many instruments playing. My audio buddy, Mr. Vintage, taught me very early on in my audio journey. If you have 5 instruments playing at the same time, yeah, it's not too hard to make out the differences. However, if you have that same 5 instruments playing do, re, mi, fa, sol, all at the same time, and you can still make out those 5 instruments, that is world-class instrument separation. For me, I hear that in the quad speakers, and I find it also in the Sibelius. So guess what? Out of all my audio buddies, Mr. Quad loves the Sibelius the most. When I mentioned that to Harley, Harley told me, yeah, you know what? A lot of Sibelius owners are actually ex-Maggie owners. That is why for me, the Sibelius is an endgame speaker in the sense, if you ever met as many audiophiles as I have, you will notice people who fall in love with Maggie and quads have a hard time going back to normal speakers. If you happen to be one that falls in love with the Sibelius sound, just like Maggie, I tell you, you will have a hard time going back to normal speakers. So, if you are a Maggie owner and you just bought a cat and your cat loves scratching your Maggies and your significant other choose to keep the cat over the Maggie, I say your significant other because we audiophiles would obviously keep the speaker, then your probable best bet is to get these Sibelius to replace your Maggie. Plus, the spouse approval factor is excellent with these speakers. So, what else is amazing with the Sibelius? Now, remember I say I find single drivers can have a hint of dryness and shoutiness? Zero. I mean zero with the Sibelius. That is why I said this sounds nothing like single drivers I've heard before. The mid-range has body and does not sound thin at all. So, what did my audio buddies think of the Sibelius? Now, Mr. Jazz gave the Sibelius plus the Deckware Tory Power Amp plus the Denafret Venus DAC a 10 on 10. He said the sound is very balanced from top to bottom. Vocals are floating above the instruments. Bass is full but controlled and not boomy at all. The sound is especially good for someone who likes the music presented up front. Loic said the combo for jazz and blues on the Deckware plus the Venus plus the Sibelius is like a decadent sundae with hot chocolate and cherries. It is so chill and smooth and yet still super detailed. It is one of those systems that you forget to analyze and just enjoy the music. Now, I'm going to skip what the others said, but needless to say, it is all positive. Next, let's talk about value. I remember Mr. Quad told me one day, Thomas, last night I was looking at the Sibelius next to the Quad, and I can't believe this speaker can do 80 to 90% of my speaker with a simple driver. My Quad is the size of a small table if you think about it. Then we talk about value. Is the Sibelius worth 4.5 grand euro? So I approached this question with him logically. Now I'm going to assume people can't just simply put a marked driver in a box and get similar sound. It took hardly 3 years to fine-tune the Sibelius. I was curious, however, so that's why I went to buy another single driver speaker that looks similar to the Sibelius, hoping that it might sound 90% close to it. Come on, they look about the same. The driver is located on the top. Both look good. Both have a square rectangular shape. Nope. The only similarity between the Sibelius and this other speaker is the shape of the speaker. So to continue on determining value, Mr. Quad and I went to Centre Hi-Fi website to see if we were to buy a pair of quad today, how much would it be? $25,000. Then I said, unlike the Sibelius, you cannot drive a quad to its full potential with just any amp. The Mcintosh today's equivalent to what Mr. Quad has is 12 grand. So 40K. Versus the Sibelius, which will get you 80% there, 90% for less than 10K. And that includes an amplifier. You tell me, is it worth it? So one thing to note though, is to close the gap between the Quad and the Sibelius, a good subwoofer helps a lot. So what about equipment matching? For this speaker, I tried it with more than 8 amps. So why did I try it with so many amps? Because unlike other speakers, I hear significant changes with each amp. The overall sound characteristic stays the same, but the changes are enough that, oh man, I was having a lot of fun. I was wondering if I was imagining things, placebo effect. So I asked Harley if this is normal. He said, well, yeah, there's no crossover, so what you're experiencing is normal. Ah, no wonder. So for those of you who are like me with gazillion amps at home, this is another reason to consider these speakers. So let me give you a few examples of how the amp changes the presentation. Mr. DIY heard a Sibelius with the Mcintosh. He wished the top end would be a bit sharper and livelier. Now, as a focal lover myself, I agree. I personally prefer brighter speakers. Now, all my other audio buddies, on the other hand, however, find the top end of the Sibelius just perfect. Yes, I know. It is the correct brightness for North America's taste, especially if you listen to it in an untreated room. Don't forget, my treated room makes focal speakers sound just right. Now, when I changed the Mcintosh to the Luxman SQ150N, I was like, WTF! The sharpness is now perfect for my taste, and it sounds more detailed. In my last video with the $300,000 system, I mentioned this piano track, Kiss the Rain from Yumura, where I can hear the faint piano mechanism clearly because that system is super resolving. With the Sibelius and the Mcintosh, I could not hear it. But when I changed to the Luxman, I can hear it. This was surprising to me, and I wish Mr. DIY can listen to this Sibelius with the Luxman SQ150N. Now, when I swapped to the 300B monoblocks, the mid-range vocal were just heart-melting, buttery smooth, and it has such a nice euphonic presentation. I was like, yeah, this is what 300B is supposed to do. Sweet-sounding mid-range, and this 300B strength really gets highlighted with the Sibelius. When I switched to the Moon 340i, I'm like, oh, the resolution and detail just jump up a notch, and the bass has better control, more nuance and texture. You see, the Moon sounds pretty neutral to me, so it was a good match with the Sibelius, especially in the bass area. However, the mid-range vocal was not as nice as the 300B. Now, that is not to say the mid-range is not good with the Moon, but every amp I tried, the Sibelius sounded great. So I don't think you have to worry too much about amp matching. I've yet to find an amp with the Sibelius where I just want to throw it out my window. My favorite was with the Luxman. Now, the only amp I forgot to try with is Class D amps. There are only so many hours in the day and I'm already not sleeping enough. So I think I have given enough flowers to the Sibelius and it's time to end the video. The point of trying different speaker is to find the perfect speaker for you. That endgame speaker. The Sibelius can be for some of you. Of course, the only way to know for sure is to try it at your home and yes, they do have a 30-day in-home trial period, but you have to pay for return shipping. Of course, just like any speaker on the market, it's not for everyone. This is more for music lovers over audiophiles. So don't expect to get a speaker with lots of sparkling explosive fireworks. Expect a speaker that will make music sound beautiful. All right?
I never think, I never know. I'm stuck and left alone. I've been lost, I've been fine. My cause is not defined. Won't you kiss me? Won't you play? Won't you try me? Ain't no way I could deny you. I could stray. Won't you kiss me? Ain't no way. Not you. Come and try me now. So never think, I never know. I'm stuck and left alone. I've been lost, I've been fine. My cause is not defined.